What's exciting about the Google Pixel 3?
And should we care about the Google Home Hub? Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we channel surf through the headlines in search of the big picture. I'm Adam Turner, and we've taken the show on the road this week to the Google hardware launch in Sydney. As always, I'm joined by the hardest working man in podcasting, Alex Kidman, who's actually standing next to me this week at Google HQ in Sydney. Alex, it's great to be in the same room.
Hang on, I thought you were a hologram. That's why I was flicking peanuts at you.
This week we're talking all things Google, so we're also joined once again by Ozdroid editor Dan the Man Tyson. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Oh, it's always a pleasure. You know, if Google holds a garage sale, I'll be there.
So let's skip the news and dive right into it. We've got the Pixel 3, a Google Smart Screen, and a lot more to talk about. Dan, what caught your eye at today's announcements?
Well, the big things, of course, is the Pixel 3, but Pixel hardware has become a bit boring in terms of hardware. I mean, it's actually more the photo features that they're including, so that's the main feature this year. And also the Home Hub. I mean, that's a whole new generation of product for Google to get into, so that's pretty much what's catching my eye.
But it's not the first Google device we've seen, well, Google-powered device with a screen, is it?
It's not. We've got the smart displays from Lenovo, and JBL's are joining us later this month, and LG has one, but they've decided not to bring it to Australia. So it's a new category, but they're sort of doing it a little bit differently.
And that's kind of backwards because like with the Google Home speaker, Google had their own speakers first and then let other people make them. But here Google's given like its hardware partners a head start.
It's sort of like they've seen what they've done in the market and decided that they can do something a little bit better. So it's going to be interesting to see what they've actually done differently.
And so, Alex, where would you fit a Google Home Hub screen into your smart home?
Look, I'll admit I'm tempted. It's a nice design. It's a little smaller than you might expect. And it certainly seems to be a little smaller, and you two have more hands-on experience with the other smart displays, but it certainly seems to be smaller than those. What I find really interesting, though, with your comment there, Dan, of them doing it better, is that in some ways they've done it less. I mean, this is a Home Hub that has no camera. This is a Home Hub that appears to be running on slightly kind of bespoke, slightly different software to that's running those smart displays. And as such, it's an interesting proposition, but I think it's one of the interesting propositions that only makes sense if you're already in the Google Home ecosystem. If you've already got a couple of Home Minis or indeed any of the other Google Assistant-enabled speakers that are out there, I think you could add this in, and I'm already in that boat, so definitely for me, and obviously, Dan, it's for you, but if you were looking, I don't think it'd be the first thing that you'd buy in this category.
I actually disagree. I actually think it's a great gateway device purely because of the new live photos feature. I'm actually thinking of getting my parents-in-law into this because my mother-in-law uses Apple products, but she loves photos. She loves using the Apple TV photos on there, and I think this is a great device to actually introduce them to smart home stuff. So I'm going to be setting them up with one of these for Christmas. I'm going to set up live photos. I've surreptitiously been installed photos on her iPhone, and she's been uploading all of her photos to the cloud. So when she actually finds out that they're all up there, she'll be quite happy. So I think this is actually a really good gateway device for people.
But then what do you do when she, you walk in one day and you realise that she's staring at the Google Home Mini and wondering why there are no photos on it?
That's just her general tech phobia, so I'll be quite used to that sort of reaction.
But I think Alex was right, having spent some time with the Lenovo smart speaker at Google I/O and now this one, while I think they are both technically a 7-inch screen, this one is a lot more compact. This one basically feels like a 7-inch tablet with a fat bezel on it, and then most of the base is hidden behind the screen where you can't see it, where the Lenovo had a lot more bulk on it. So someone who's maybe not as tech savvy as us and doesn't want something that looks so techy in their living area might be more tempted to go with this because it really looks more like a fancy photo frame than some kind of digital speaker thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was actually just about to say, that this has that kind of reminiscent feel of an old school photo frame from, 5-10 years ago. I think it's actually probably a slightly nicer design thing, especially because it's in multiple colours. I wish Google could work out if a thing that's a soft pink colour is called not pink or sand, though, because they seem to be exactly the same thing. It just one is the colour that you put on a Pixel 3 phone and the other is the colour that you put on a Google Home.
So, Dan, how do you think the sound stacks up from the Home Hub as opposed to the other Google Home speakers?
It sort of fits in around about just between the Home Mini and the actual full Home, not the Home Max. The Home Max is the absolute pinnacle, but sort of halfway between the Home Mini and the Home itself. So it's a decent sound, but it still has that lower sort of enclosed sort of sound that you can't get to quite the top end.
And of course, we've actually got a competitor in this space launching literally in Australia today, which is the Amazon equivalent, the Echo Show, and we're getting the V2 version of that. But I find there's some really interesting differences between them. They're both kind of talking up the smart home stuff, and that's probably almost a tie between them. They both own certain smart home appliances. They both work with things like Philips Hue. One thing, though, that I reckon Google has got that Amazon does not, however, is they've got a better grasp on video, because Amazon, you can do Prime Video and you can do a little bit of Fox Sports and a few other little bits and pieces. Google can do YouTube, and for the vast majority of people, I think YouTube trumps all.
Certainly does, but they've also got limitations on things like Netflix, who, as a company, they maintain a lot of quality control, and they have to do things like certified devices, which is why you saw things like the Foxtel Android TV box doesn't support Netflix, because Netflix hasn't certified it. And that's the same with the Home Hub, so we're still waiting on Netflix to do that. And that's been the same with all the other smart displays from Lenovo and JBL. They don't support Netflix casting to them.
But it's interesting that this thing is actually a full Chromecast, so Netflix aside, you could take anything that you would stream from your phone to a Chromecast plugged into your television and stream it onto this screen.
Well, in theory, I think this is going to be the really interesting practical thing. Can I grab the latest episode of Doctor Who off iView and send it to this thing? Now, the use cases for that are not huge, obviously, because this is not a massive screen. I'm probably going to still want to watch it on a 60-inch TV rather than on a 7-inch Home Hub. But the ability to do it, or even just the ability to share that silly little thing, which might not be sitting on YouTube, might be sitting on something else, could be really useful as long as it works. And as with all things casting, it's that beautiful thing. When it works, it's magical, and when it doesn't, you just want to bang your head against the kitchen bench.
I think the quality of the video, the quality of the screen will really show through when you're trying to watch a video on it. And in our briefing then, it seemed to me to have a very glary screen, so if your lights are in the wrong spot in the kitchen, you're going to have trouble with that. And it's not an adjustable stand, so you can't adjust the angle that it's on. It shows up the fingerprints a bit, although it's nice and bright, which should show through that. But it seemed to have pretty good viewing angles, which is something where photo frames can often fall down. So that will definitely help as sort of a general entertainment device.
It looks pretty good for that sort of thing, so it's going to come down to, your downloaded videos. We'll probably...
Home videos, we like to call them.
Your home videos will certainly work through things like Allcast and stuff like that, so they're basic sort of applications. I'm more interested in things like whether the established apps like the ABC iView app, whether that sort of thing will work. So then you can watch your Doctor Who. So that's the more thing. They did say they were working with Stan to incorporate stuff into it, so that's sort of an interesting one to see whether they do things with Foxtel and stuff like that, with other Australian partners.
Now, Dan, we touched on this kind of in the intro. It's not just the Home Hub, though. It is also the Pixel 3, and that's their big hype point. And one of the more interesting things about this year's Pixel launch is that it's no longer a Telstra exclusive. Do you think that will actually help Pixel get wider exposure in Australia?
So I think I've got two thoughts on this. One of them is getting more a wider distribution for the Pixel phones, because they've always been traditionally a nerd sort of piece of hardware. But there's another side which I was... But then I was also thinking, I actually wrote on it this morning, it's the implementation of RCS, Rich Communication Services. Traditionally, Telstra's been the only one in Australia to offer Rich Communication Services, which is sort of an upgrade to SMS texting, so you can get things like media and stuff in your text. I think this may be a way that Telstra can sort of leverage Google can leverage pushing their RCS service onto everyone. RCS isn't a Google service; it's certified by the GSMA, who does all these things, but it's been very not widely distributed. So I think this may be a chance for Vodafone and Optus to actually bring RCS to their customers as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And actually, Telstra's going out there pretty aggressively in terms of their pre-order strategy, because they're throwing in another Home Mini along with it, where the others are essentially doing their plans. Optus is doing double data, but they're doing double data for pretty much everything right at the moment.
It's the data's fine. The one thing I'm really upset about is I'm not getting a Pixel stand when I pre-order my Pixel 3 phone from any of the carriers here, and I'm getting another Google Home Mini, which I've already got 14 in my house, so why do I need another one?
So what's a Pixel stand?
So the Pixel stand is their Qi compatible charger. Now Qi is a wireless charging standard, so you basically put it on your Pixel 3 phone onto the charger, and it actually activates a new integration of Google Assistant, which will bring about things like it'll show your text messages, it'll show your photo frames. So that's basically turning it into another home hub. You can actually control all your smart home devices and things like that while you charge your phone.
Although that's not inherent to Qi. Because let's face it, wireless charging, Google's actually late to this particular party.
Well, not particularly late. They actually had a break from it. So the Nexus 4, Nexus 5, and the Nexus 5X all had, the Nexus 6, not the 5X, they actually stopped it with that, all had wireless charging. And then they've taken a break for 3-4 years, and they've come back to it.
Okay, so they're new to it with Pixels. Fair point, fair call. But still, in terms of the premium phone space, Samsung's had it. In fact, Samsung do Qi and PMA, but Samsung's had it, LG's had it. It's been across a whole bunch of phones. Google's now coming back to it, as you say, but that's not inherent to Qi. That's actually inherent to the Pixel stand. If you want those features, you've got to get a Pixel stand. You can't just throw it onto a wireless charger that you might already have.
You can to charge it, but you're exactly right. You can't get those features, which I think they call Dreamliner, to actually get those features. So if you want those cool, nifty features while your phone is charging, you've definitely got to get a Pixel stand. And at $119, it's not a bad price for a Qi charger.
It's pretty reasonable. I'm going to be really curious to see whether or not they actually license that technology out to the people who already make wireless chargers, the likes of, in fact, of course, obviously our show sponsors, Belkin, do that kind of thing, and they've got a pretty strong history in licensing stuff. It's going to be really fascinating to see whether or not that comes through. And, of course, the Android market being what it is, it's going to be really fascinating to see whether or not the other Android makers put that either put that straight technology so you could throw another phone onto a Pixel stand, or come up with their own version of it as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether that's built into Android Pie or whether it's actually just a Pixel feature.
So when it comes to screen sizes, we've got two new Pixels. We've got the Pixel 3, which is, I want to say 5.5 inches, yes, and the XL, which is 6.3. So they're kind of standard sizes these days. We didn't get our super fat sort of 6.5 plus, and we didn't get our Pixel 3 Mini that some people thought we were going to get. Is there a missed opportunity there? Is there a sweet spot that people were hoping for that we haven't seen?
There's certainly a lot of love for the mini phones. We see that with the Sony Xperia Compact line. There is still a little bit of a rumour about a so-called mini Pixel. They've been testing something called with a code name of Bonito in things like in the Android code. So that's powered by a Snapdragon 710 processor. That's actually in existence. Whether that actually makes it to market is another question. It's rumoured to be going to some of the emerging markets as a sort of an Android One device, but we'll sort of see.
And speaking of things not coming to market, and Dan, I know you're just as kind of cranky about this as I am. The other big thing that they announced at their New York launch, which we won't see here, is the Pixel Slate. Now, talk us through why you would want a Pixel Slate, why I want a Pixel Slate, why Adam might want a Pixel Slate.
Well, I'm a massive Chrome OS user. Most of the content on Osdroid is produced on a Chromebox. But it's basically, best example is when I went to turn on my wife's laptop last night, which is a Windows machine, to start doing things for screen capture, and it proceeded to do 20 minutes of Windows updates.
Welcome to Windows.
I never get that on Chrome OS. It's a very light operating system, and with the addition of Android apps, you're getting one of the best experiences on a tablet you can, because you get a full desktop version of Chrome, you can get all your extensions and all that sort of stuff, but you also get the option of Android apps, and that opens the whole field to a lot more productivity.
Yeah, I mean, look, my take on it is that, I use a lot of Apple stuff as well. In the tablet space, there isn't really an Android tablet yet that particularly competes with the iPad in terms of that ease of use, of that comfort, of that speed, of that power. This looks like it's it, but they're not bringing it to Australia.
And we're all frustrated. So we've all got our import buttons handy, and we'll be looking around as soon as they release it.
Well, we were talking about the Surface Pro 6 the other week, and the frustration, and with a lot of these things, they say, oh, it's great with the keyboard, but the keyboard is extra. Now, the keyboard is extra on the Pixel Slate as well. How useful is this thing without the keyboard? Would you think the keyboard is as necessary as it might be with something like Surface Pro?
Yes, Scott actually tested out the Acer Chromebook tab, which is why they didn't just call it the Chrome tab, I don't know. And he said that it was very useless, basically, without a keyboard. So the on-screen keyboard wasn't actually acting as it should. and he really bemoaned the lack of a keyboard case for it. So without the keyboard case, I think you're really going to find it basically a disappointment.
I think you've functionally just got to say, if you're going to import a Pixel Slate, get the keyboard as well.
But you probably don't need the stylus. It's actually a stylus-driven device if you want it to be. I grabbed myself a Pixelbook stylus with the Pixelbook when I imported it last year. I've used it once.
But, if you're a budding, stick figure artist, this is the position that a lot of these...
That is a bit of a niche market, to be honest.
Look, it probably is. But artists generally are the ones who they try and sell a stylus-based approach to. People who are doing more kind of that fine line work, who need that particular precise touch. I'm totally with you. I don't use a stylus or the Surface Pen on a Surface or the Apple Pencil much at all. They're there. They're an option for people, and I think they are an option for a very, very small niche of people.
And I think it's going to be also things like the lack of apps that support the Pixelbook stylus, which is one of the problems. There are a few, but it's still a very niche market, as you say.
And speaking of things that aren't coming to Australia, they started showing off more of how duplex will actually work on a phone. This is the thing that seemingly passed the Turing test back at Google I/O. People were ringing up, it was ringing a florist to book flowers or a hairdresser's appointment and talking to the receptionist and deliberately putting in ums and ahs and sounding like a real person and tricking these people into thinking it was real. Now, Google says, we're not trying to trick people. It'll tell you it's a machine, whatever. They're now actually going to get it to start working on phones. What are the first things that it's going to do?
Well, it's going to do things like screening your calls. So if you don't know the number, you can automatically send your Google Assistant out to take your call. So the duplex will actually come in and ask the person on the line, what's it about? But
it doesn't pretend to be you, though, does it?
No, it actually says this is a Google Assistant or a Google interim person. So basically, not a person.
I think there's some fascinating etiquette at play here, and I actually had a discussion with Matthew Wu, who we've had on the show before, about this yesterday, about the use between PR people and journalists as to whether or not you're taking someone's call, because in one sense, huge time saver. If somebody wants to kind of pitch something at me, they can kind of say, right, this is what it is, and I know whether or not I want to pick up the call. At the other end, though, it is massively impersonal. And if I'm if I'm calling someone and I get their robot, which is what this is, I'm quite possibly thinking, well, stuff you. You can't be bothered to talk to me. There's a social aspect to this. And I think it's really fascinating to see how well it's taken up, and indeed, obviously, how quickly it spreads across phone services and even simple stuff like how much data it might use.
I can't quite frankly wait to give it to my wife.
Well, so she can field calls from you and go, no, I'm not talking to you today.
Pretty much.
So we saw a few other bits and pieces. There were new Pixel Buds, a new Chromecast. Did any of them really stand out?
So the Pixel Buds are actually just a USB-C pair of headphones, and they're actually coming in the box with your Pixel 3. So that's sort of a new pair of Pixel Buds, but not really. Yeah, but it's still a big thing that people like to use wired headphones. There hasn't been a lot of USB-C headphones, so this is sort of filling that gap. They're available to buy if you want to buy them for your phone on the Google store, so that's an option for everyone. The Chromecast Gen 3, basically exactly the same internals, just a pretty new case.
And it's not
Stacey of Chromecasts.
It's got a new hat.
And it's not 4K, is it, though? Because that's the Chromecast Ultra, which is a separate product.
Exactly right. It simply supports up to 1080p streams. That's all it does.
So it would just replace the 2s that are on the shelves now.
Exactly right. So if you want to go into JB Hi-Fi and grab one of the pretty red or yellow ones that are available, your market is closing.
One of the other interesting aspects, though, they talked up a lot about the camera, and it's still a single-lens camera, but they're saying, hey, our machine learning and our AI and our computation is so damn good that we can just make this work through sheer brute force. And the examples they've shown seem to support that. Except there is a little catch here, because a lot of the software features that they showed on stage are not actually going to be available at launch, are they?
It's mainly my big one is Night Sight, which I think everyone is excited for, which Night Sight is basically they're using their computational photography to basically get rid of the flash, which everyone hates. So we expect a maintenance release for Android phones usually after the Pixel releases for the last 3 years, and this is probably going to be in it. So that's, we hope. And from all intents and purposes, it looks a really good feature.
When you say get rid of the flash, what do you mean? How does it work?
So it uses basically AI to work out what the colours are in the photo and brighten them to the point where it looks like it's daylight. And It looks like it works.
So it's taking an educated guess.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of interesting detail that I want to test out with this thing because, as you say, it's taking a guess. It's not grabbing information or having larger pixels or any of that kind of technology-led stuff. It's going, right, well, I've got 1,000,001 photos of Dan. I think I know what Dan looks like. Therefore, I'll make it look like Dan. But obviously, if Dan goes out and shaves his beard off or gets a massive facial tattoo or something, I mean, there could be some really interesting little mismatches in the same way that we see for AI modes on loads of other phone cameras these days, where it goes, this is my best educated guess as to what you want to see. But in this case, because it's actually doing it with brightness, it could work spectacularly well. I reckon we might see some really hilarious and possibly problematic failures too.
Well, an interesting one is skin tones, and they had a good example of 3 different people with 3 different coloured skin tones, and it had done a fantastic job. And when you saw the original photo, it was so dark you couldn't tell whose skin looked like what. Now, how many of them they had to take before they chose that one as the right one, we don't know. And whilst they didn't talk too much about it on the spot, they did say there was a lot involved in skin tones. So I think they're smart enough to realise that this can be a real sensitive issue if you get it wrong. But even the ones that were bumping up the colours and the brightness, some of them look fantastic. Others to me looked a little bit overblown, like they were just trying a bit too hard. So it'd be interesting to see if you can tweak the settings in it.
That's all great points, but the one thing I'm actually worried about is whether it actually arrives at all. Google is known for announcing things, even on stage in these big events, and then it never comes. They announced this great feature where you could take a photo with a fence between you and the subject, and it would remove the fence, and that feature just completely got thrown out the window. It was announced on stage, everyone was excited, and it went.
It clearly caused offence. But at least...
Yeah, look, that's it, tap out, time to go.
But look, at least they are delivering things. I mean, they have a wireless charger. I am still waiting for the Apple AirPower charger, for example. So,
what the hell's an AirMat?
Exactly. The photography thing, I think, is also interesting if you're considering a Pixel 3 because of that weight, but also because they've actually said that they're going to backdate these. So if you've got a Pixel or a Pixel 2, you'll get these. You will get the night sight feature, which I find fascinating. I'm really interested to see how they compare, whether or not it works better on a Pixel 3 because it's a more powerful phone than it does on a Pixel 2, or is it just a case of, well, the cloud knows all this stuff, so it just does the same thing to that kind of capture?
That's one of the main features. I mean, Google is great at computational photography, but I mean, the proof is always in the pudding, so we're all going to be waiting to see that, so I'll have them.
It also, though, of course, raises this really interesting question, because I think you can fairly assume that people who've bought existing Pixels are going to be a big part of that market that goes, oh, new Pixel, I want that. But if you're saying, well, actually, the new feature's a camera, and we're bringing a whole bunch of them to your camera, is there a reason to upgrade?
Well, they're certainly cutting into their own lunch there, so that's a big figure, but it also comes back to what I said before. Pixel has always been the nerd phone, so there's not a lot of them out there. So if they're seeing new customers go, well, you're bringing back these to older phones, if I buy this, I'll get next year's features on this phone. And of course, we're getting 3 years worth of feature and security updates with the Pixel, so that's a pretty good sort of turnaround.
And of course, this year's model comes in pink.
Not pink.
Pink.
Not pink.
Pink.
Not pink.
I'm confused.
Sand.
We'll go with sand.
So they were saying that Google devices or Pixel devices these days get 3 years worth of updates. So that's 3 new OSs. Does that mean that the original Pixels are sort of approaching their end of life in that way? Is this year or next year the last update they'll get?
This is the last year they'll get it. So basically Pi is where they'll end. But of course with Android, custom ROM community is very strong. So there's always options.
So that just about wraps up another episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Dan for joining us for the show.
Look, I'll be here for you guys anytime.
Thanks to Adam for being within punching distance. And
always a pleasure.
And thanks to you for listening. Now, obviously, we don't always record like this. We'd love to be able to. But if you've got thoughts on the show, if you've got thoughts on the new Pixel phones or the Pixel stand or the Pixel Slate, or you think Google's getting it 100% wrong, let us know via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page.
Thanks everyone for listening, and remember, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button. Tell your friends, get them to hit the subscribe button. Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, is proudly brought to you by Belkin. Wait, everyone move 10 feet that way.